just last minute tweaks using the warp tool. Now I'm just doing the gray tone. You might have noticed that right away I went into midtones. I used a gray to create my midtone. I find it easier than going from a white background and building up my darks to midtones. This way I find I don't have any fear of going too dark and or too bright if I was doing highlights. It's just I find it a lot easier to adjust if I start with my midtones, and I can adjust with the levels a lot easier. During this process, I used to draw my highlights as well, but now I've skipped it towards to the end when I do colors. The reason why is when I use certain blend modes, I often find that some of the highlights will do some wacky things. So now I've just simplified it a lot more by just doing my midtones using my darks only. You might have noticed that when I do each object, similar to the way I work with lines, I'll make a new layer, start to tone it, and then once I'm happy with it, I'll collapse it. I set my brush to opacity like 50, 40, 80%. It varies. But if I want more control, I also adjust my layers as well, the opacity a little bit softer, so that I don't have to worry about going too dark. I do this process almost like Pantone markers, and I'm not too worried about streaks because of the nature of this metallic chrome. It almost helps that you do have streaks. So now I'm laying in some color. I'm just blocking it in. You'll notice I'll flick through the blend modes a couple of times and see whatever color works. Sometimes color works, multiply works, vivid. I just flick through it, see what happens, and then I'll adjust my hue, saturation, and brightness later on. Not too picky about the colors about now. Usually around when I block in colors, I tend to go a little bit darker and saturation really low at this point. And when I do my highlights, I'll keep my highlights really thick and high saturation. It'll give it a little bit more pop, and it will make it a little bit more alive when you look at the colors. Give you some more vibrancy. I'm going back to adjust my values again, make it a little bit darker in those shadowed areas. Now I'm working my highlights, and you can see that I didn't take a red and go from pink to white. I'll take an adjacent value, adjacent hue, and like red to orange to white, or sometimes even yellow to white. I find that if you use a slightly different color in your highlights, it punches things out. Doesn't make your colors as dead. And you'll notice I'll also use white very sparingly. I try to leave it to the very, very end when I do highlights. So I'm just building up that tone. For the highlights, I'm just using normal and just painting it with opacity, no special blend modes or whatever. Just keep it simple at that point. I don't really need to use my gray tone values as much. Now that most of the shape is built in, I can just highlight and just accentuate the form that I did in the gray tones. So I'm just building up those highlights. Now I'm just using, you'll notice I'm using my whites now, and I'm keeping it my whites to a minimum, just like small lines, or small dots, just to really give that hot pop brightness, that gleam that you would see from metallic objects. So I'm just building up that skin tone up to the highlights. And now I'll be working on some bounce light. And what I mean by bounce light is that some objects will reflect light beside adjacent objects. So, and because of the nature of shadows, they tend to be a little bit cooler. So instead of using black, I'm using, or I tend to use dark blues or dark purples. And because I'm using a little bit of bounce light, I'm giving it a little bit of a purple light, and you'll notice it's not as bright as my main light source, so I'll keep that fairly dim, just building up that shadow. You'll notice on just right now on the hand I just put a little bit red on, and on the cuffs too. It's just some of that back bounce light I'm talking about, and I find that if you put colors beside each other, there's a little bit of harmony. You bring those little, whatever object it's beside, a little bit of that color, and it brings things together a bit more. So increasing my depth by adding more shadows, just to push back like those backpacks and those hands a little bit more from the main objects up front. Now I'm just working the lines. Just because it's comic booky, I decided to go and thicken those lines a bit more. If I was to go and do it realistic, I probably render this a little bit more tighter, but because of this time constraint on this tutorial, I'm just keeping it really simple. And now I'm adding white to over on top of that black line, because later on I'll put a darker background, and this will help keep my black line intact and really pull it out from the background. And that's just the end of my tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.